once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. We just want to remind you about the event taking place on the 28th of July, 2022. That is the Plumbing Industry Awards. Now, IOPSA invites you to attend that at the Royal Elephant Hotel and Conference Center at 6 o'clock. For more information, please contact marketing@iopsa.org. So if you are going through to that, we wish you all the best. And also for anybody who is being given those awards out on that day. So the tips to continually prevent COVID-19, we have had a resurgence of the new variant. And so obviously we are encouraged to do our best to try and prevent this as much as possible. And by washing your hands, making sure you use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. If you don't have water and soap available, avoid touching your eyes, nose and mouth with unwashed hands, especially if you're going to be touching a lot of surfaces and objects all the time. Adhere to your social distancing, especially when somebody is feeling sick. I know that we have had it just in recent days where we've had quite a few people getting ill, and that's also because they've attended large gatherings. So if at all possible, please stick to that social distancing measures where you can. We do understand that a lot of times it is coming from family, and so we do apologize for many of you who are feeling sick and who are getting this new variant. We hope you feel better soon. Then please cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or a tissue and throw this into the bin, and clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. Now, as we've mentioned before, this doesn't only stop COVID-19. In fact, it stops a whole range of other health-related illnesses. And so killing viruses or bacteria is a very good thing to do. So cleaning and disinfecting is basic housekeeping. We want to always keep ourselves neat and clean and keep our own good hygiene habits so that we do prevent illnesses in the future, not just COVID. And then if you can, do your part and get vaccinated. Now, this morning we are taking a look at welding. Obviously, coming up for the rest of the month, ladders, scaffolding, and ceilings. We are going to be focusing on working at heights a little bit because it is such a dangerous area for plumbers to work in. And so we do want the focus this month really to be to please hook up at heights. Make sure you've planned the working at heights in a good manner. Make sure that you've set up the ladder correctly and are using the correct ladder. Make sure that the scaffolding as well that you are setting up is done according to SANS 18885 standards, as well as using a competent scaffolding contractor should you not be doing it yourself. Then if you're working in ceilings, many feel that this is not actually working at heights, it's just in a ceiling because you're not on a construction site, you're in a private home. Well, many can still fall through ceilings and there's still a fall risk. So why is it so dangerous and what can you do? Even though you're not on a construction site, we still adhere to General Safety Regulations 13 with working at heights and use of ladders. And so regardless of scaffolding, ladders or ceilings, we know that we can prevent these falls. So the safety thought for this week, if you are aware of it, take care of it. So if you have seen something, please try to do something to stop it from reoccurring. Now let's get straight into welding hazards. As a plumber, you do many different types of welding. And when you are welding, there are health and safety hazards that come from it. Your two main health hazards, if you see on the welding on the left-hand side, that is metal fumes, that you could inhale, and then also the ultraviolet radiation from some types of welding. Not all welding have ultraviolet radiation or UV, but we do understand that there is certain health incidents that have been occurring with guys not using the correct types of PPE when welding. Then your safety hazards, things such as burning. So burning yourself from the sparks, touching the surface after it's been welded and not waiting for it to cool down, getting eye damage because you are wearing the incorrect types of face coverings, electrical shock, perhaps from the thing that we are touching, perhaps from the incorrect use of the actual welding machine itself, or because the welding machine is just not maintained. Then we have things like cuts, crushed toes, and fingers. Now you might think, well, how is it possible to get cuts, crushed toes, and fingers? Well, although it's a small part, for many who are welding, they have jagged edges, and this is where they're cutting themselves on it. And then some, when the weld is not done correctly, the piece of metal falls off, and then this is where people are getting their crushed toes and fingers because the welding is not being done correctly. So today we are talking about the welding side of it, but also the health and safety aspects to say, don't just be safe, but also do the work correctly, because not doing the work correctly can lead to further incidents and accidents down the line. In fact, it may lead to other people endangering themselves because of the poor work that you perhaps have done. Now, we know that as a plumber, you do many different types of welding, and each welder has their own different welding technique. So some of you will work with a melting tool with pulling motion. Some of you will use a pushing motion. Now, depending on the type of welding that you are doing, and also if you are left-handed or right-handed, all of this is going to vary. And it's also going to vary on the quality, because many have been taught to do welding in a certain manner. Now, in order to get the best out of your welding, what you want to do is see what is the best method, not just for yourself, but also for the type of plumbing that you are needing to do. So one person might create loops in the same direction, while the other will draw figure of eights. The most important thing is, though, that the resulting joint is evenly and solidly created, and this can be done in different ways, and it can always be done safely. So although this is a toolbox talk on health and safety, the methodology of plumbing is also very important for us. Well, why is that? Well, for one thing, if the job is done correctly, not necessarily only safely, so we're not only looking at the safety aspect, but a quality project is actually being performed and a quality product is being handed over to your client, there are less incidents and accidents that will come from damaged piping, or perhaps incorrect installations that fail, fall, or perhaps damage or hurt a person or even a customer of yours because it wasn't done correctly. Now, welding obviously is quite a broad aspect within plumbing tasks, because it's something as small as perhaps just a plumbing pipe that needs to be put together, or perhaps it can be something quite major, like a massive stand, or even like a water stand that needs to be put on for water reticulation or water capturing, grey water harvesting, whatever it is. Welding will take place in all of those aspects. Now, if you are not doing the welding yourself, perhaps you're buying those stands from somebody else, then they also need to ensure that that stand does not fail. Can you imagine putting a 10,000 liter tank onto a stand, and once it's filled with water, the stand just crumbles underneath the weight of that tank, purely because the welding was not done correctly? Well, you could see the hazard that that would create for any person who installs that tank, being yourself, the plumber. So we know that welding methods do change. You might have to do it yourself. You might get a contractor in to do it, or you might just buy the stand separately. Either way, the welding part of it, if it's not done correctly, has the potential to cause danger. Now, this is what we are trying to mention to you as plumbers. If you have any welding work that you need to do, the health and safety aspect of it extends further than actually just ensuring that you are safe with the use of PPE while doing the welding. It extends past yourself to the user. So the person that's going to use that piece of equipment also needs to be kept safe by the work that you're doing. In fact, this goes along with any type of work. The installation of geysers, plumbing, using a grinder, maybe even painting or plastering up over plumbing. All of this needs to be done with a relative view toward quality and sustainability, to ensure that the work that you are handing over is not going to cause injury to a person. So when we speak about health and safety, we also want to encourage you to think not just of your own health and safety or the task that you're performing, but the health and safety of those who might come after you, those users, those clients that also want to ensure that the installation you're providing is going to be done properly. Now, the selection of proper welding equipment depends again on your welding method. So for instance, if you're doing MIG welding, then a MIG welder will suffice. But if you're using multi-purpose welder, so if you're going to try and do different types of welding, so there's 4 different types of welding that you can do with a multi-purpose welder. And this is perhaps maybe a better investment for you. Now, I know these types of welders are expensive, but that is why it is important for you to do your research into what types of welding you're not only going to do, but what about future projects? What about your own own company, are you wanting to include different types of services for your clients in the future? You see, if you're going to be performing different types of services to your clients, perhaps you need to use different tools. Now, the reason why we mention this is many people fail in the preparation of their projects, especially future projects. And that's because we feel that we cannot really see into the future. We don't actually know what we're going to have. And we're not going to outlay a huge sum of money in the hopes of getting our client to sign a deal with us. And then if they don't, we're left with a whole lot of equipment that we cannot use. Now, we're not saying we want you to take that type of gamble or take that type of risk. Many of you have, and it's worked out for you. Many of you have, and it hasn't worked out for you. So we understand that. From a business perspective, we also want you to look at things from a health and safety perspective. But what we are saying is that when we do a proper inspection and proper research into the types of welding, the types of work that we are going to perform, we want to ensure that we look at it from the perspective of, is it sustainable for the company? Are you using somebody in the company to be taught how to use the new equipment correctly? You see, the better you train someone, the better they use the equipment. And the better the equipment is used, the longer the equipment will last. So you're getting more time out of that equipment for the money that you are spending. You see, if a company vehicle is misused, then often you're changing the brakes a lot more often, or the tires are getting worn out a lot more often. And I don't know about you, but tires are pretty expensive in my eyes, and so is a service which just includes filters and brakes. And never mind your major maintenance programs, which include things like your clutch, your gearbox, things that you shouldn't necessarily replace very often. But it does because of the abuse of the actual equipment. Now, if it was used properly, if the employee took pride in that vehicle and the employee realized that the vehicle makes the company money and also is a front view for the client of what the company stands for, a clean car, one that's in good condition, and one that is obviously reliable. This is the same with our tools and equipment that we are using. See, the client can see our tools and equipment. They see how we dressed. They see our shoes. They see our gloves. And if they see that it's abused, and I'm not saying used, I'm saying abused, then perhaps their idea of the type of work they're going to be getting is also one that is going to be thinking, perhaps the work that they're going to put out is not as quality as they are stating, especially when it comes to the quote that we are giving them to say, this is what we're going to charge you to do this installation, but we look like we are not worth that amount. So we need to be careful with this because our welding equipment is also very important. In fact, all equipment, all tools and equipment that we are using is very important. So do your research into not just the type of equipment, but the person you're going to invest this equipment with. And this is often where we lack in training our staff. Because we think, well, staff come and go, and that is true. Staff will be there, staff won't be there, and the tools that you buy perhaps will last very long. But what we want to do is we don't want to rely on just one or two people alone in a company that can only do specific work. You see, if they are out of service, out of action, perhaps they're sick, then that part of your business cannot work. And as employees, remember, it is the employer's responsibility to keep you safe. It is also your responsibility to keep yourself safe. But if you are looking after your equipment and you are keeping yourself safe as well as your clients safe, you are going to then extend the life of that equipment. You're not only going to extend the life of the equipment, but you're going to extend the life of you working in the company and also the company itself. And in the difficult times that we live in at the moment, we cannot stress enough how important it is to have a business that is actually turning over and doing well. In fact, many are just getting by at this stage. So we are very fortunate when we are in a position in a company to be able to earn a salary to feed our families. So what are the safety aspects that we are going to remind you of today when you are going to be doing any type of welding? And we can extend this further as we do in all Toolbox Talks, that safety is a way of life. It's really a behavior. And so when we speak about any type of safety aspect, you can apply this not just to welding, but to any other form of work that you are performing over this week. Now, with welding, you're going to need a safety helmet. Why? Well, you want to protect your eyes and your face. The other important thing, you'll need to wear sturdy, thick shoes, leather gloves, long sleeve shirt, overalls, and all of these can protect you from the sparks. Now, this is a very important part of the work, isn't it? And many of you have this in place. In fact, when we get to sites, we realize that the welding is actually very, very well done. And we need to commend all of you on that. For those of you that have been with me on site and that have come to audit your sites or even audit your staff or your safety files, I can 100% say on the welding aspect, the hot works aspect of all of the sites, I have seen a remarkable improvement from the previous years. You guys are really, really doing very well. But we do want to mention one thing. Is it only PPE that we need to rely on? Now, we're not saying the but as in you did well, but you're not doing well. We're saying you're doing well, but we want you to think of something extra, because it's not just PPE that keeps our employees safe. One thing to remember is the hierarchy of control. So the hierarchy of control is the risk analysis once we have done our full risk assessment. So our risk assessment tells us that we're going to be welding, we're going to be doing hot works, we're going to be using a certain amount of tools, and we try and put those control measures in. Now, before we even do a control measure, we need to look at the hierarchy of control, which means the best method or the most effective control in order to keep us safe, not just PPE. So before we expose any person to any hazard, we would want to try and eliminate that hazard altogether. Now, obviously, that's not always possible. So the next thing we try to do is replace the hazard with something less hazardous. Now, you think to yourself, well, how is that possible? If the hazard's there and that's the type of work that we need to do, how is it that we can replace that with something less hazardous? Well, there are means and ways of doing that. For instance, if you're using a hazardous chemical substance, can you do your research into finding a substance that is less hazardous or not hazardous at all in order to perform the same work? Then you are replacing that hazard. You still have to perhaps do the work, so there's still certain risks, but now you're eliminating the possibility or replacing the possibility of that hazard existing with the employee. And you replace it with something that is less hazardous. Another example of this is if you had to climb onto a roof. If the roof was 4 meters high and you had a 5-meter ladder and a 5-meter scaffold, which would you prefer to use? Well, obviously you would say, well, a scaffold, because a scaffold is safer to be able to climb onto a roof with. It's got barricading, it's got staircases. So it's a lot safer for me to climb onto a roof using a scaffold compared to using a 5-meter ladder, because a ladder doesn't have barricading around it. And you'll be 100% correct. A scaffold is safer than a ladder, as long as both of them are set up correctly. So replacing that meant that it's not as high risk now climbing on a ladder as it is climbing on a scaffold. So one person's risk assessment will now be lowered due to the fact of the hierarchy of control has been used to replace the hazard with something less hazardous. All right, so this you can do in every single day life. Then if it's not possible, we don't have the budget to be able to purchase scaffolding or to hire a contractor to come and put scaffolding up, we have to use the ladder. Well, then can we look at isolating the person so that the hazard exposure is minimized? In other words, is it possible to take the human element out of it? And now you might think, well, that's not possible. Well, perhaps there's parts of the job that can be done that you can isolate the person. For instance, lifting the tools and equipment to the roof. Well, we wouldn't want to put it onto the person in a backpack. What we'd rather do is lift it with a rope, and that would then go up in a bucket, lift it to the roof, and not be carried up on the ladder. And so you've isolated that part of the work away from a person. Yes, it's still a person lifting it, but that person is not being lifted to the roof. They can then climb the ladder safely without anything on them or in their hands. So that would be the safest method. Again, isolating the person. Now, another form of isolating a person comes with welding. When you are welding in an area, you can put up welding screens. And a well-designed and good constructed welding screen will eliminate the possibility of sparks reaching another area. And this would then isolate the other area or the persons working in that area from the hazard of sparks and welding. So you can see there is all these huge possibilities before we get to the final step of building a safe behavior and introducing PPE. So here is the representation of the hierarchy of controls, working, as you see on the left-hand side, from most effective to least effective. It is still effective, so we still want to use it, but it is most effective to try and remove the hazard, eliminate it completely, then try and substitute it or replace the hazard. Put some sort of engineering control in isolating people from the hazard. An engineering control would be something that has been designed to protect the person aside from PPE. So this could be barricading or barriers or anything like a guard that would stop the person from attaching themselves to that hazard straight away. So these engineering controls are things that need to be put in place all the time. Then administrative controls. Change the way people work. Now, can you see how much more effective that is than the actual PPE? And perhaps you would agree with me, and this is something that we've spoken to plumbers about before. A couple of years ago, in fact, many, many years ago, when we used to work at heights without full protection, without these harnesses, you used to see the guys on buildings, on towers, without harnesses, not many people fell. And now we're saying, now that we've introduced health and safety, more people fall because it's become such a pain. And I agree to a degree, and there's areas where I will disagree. And that is because the behavior of people has also changed. You see, we've become so reliant on our PPE that we are failing in the area of administrative, changing the way people work. You see, if you don't work safely, no amount of PPE will save you. In other words, the reason why people are falling to their death off a roof is because they're not hooking up at heights. And so that's a behavioral change. You see, that's not the PPE. The PPE is still intact. In fact, even after a person has fallen and died from a fall, that harness is generally still intact. Why? It's because they didn't hook onto the lifeline or to the anchor point. That is a behavioral change that needs to occur. So instead of blaming the PPE or blaming the health and safety aspect of it, let us look at the administrative controls. Let us look at the documented method of working safely. And remember the importance of having a person behaviorally change the method of how they work and the way they work before introducing PPE. And then finally, PPE, because it's mandatory, we have to include PPE. So remember, we always start with the most effective protection and work our way down. But if PPE is mandatory, then shouldn't we at least give it a try to make administrative controls mandatory, engineering controls mandatory, and eventually getting to substitution, where now we are not reliant on PPE. We're not reliant on training. We're not relying on isolating. What we are doing now is actively removing and replacing the hazard or minimizing it to a better point. So what else can you use? Things that are not just administrative, but also engineering. So things like clamps, magnets. Is it something that you can invest in? Instead of having a person's hand there, is there a clamp that we can purchase? Is there a magnet that we can use to hold these two things together? It's also a good idea to have fiberglass blankets on hand, if that's at all possible, and this will help sparks from spreading. So these blankets can be purchased, or even welding blankets, a fire extinguisher nearby in case of small fires, a first aid kit to deal with minor injuries. You see, stop it at minor. We don't want to get further than minor. Have your registers and checklists in place to ensure that all tools that you're working with have been checked and are actually good to use. Most importantly, have you been trained? Do you know how to use the work or the tools that you are using? Do you know how to perform that work to a quality standard that upholds the standards not just of your company, but is also satisfactory to your customers? And then finally, a reminder, this is just to keep our hearts beating, keeping ourselves safe, keeping us healthy and safe on a work site, protecting yourself and others. Take charge of your own health and safety. Look out for the health and safety of those who work with you. We cannot stress the importance of housekeeping. It is so important. A good, clean house is going to lend to a much safer workplace. Prevent accidents by preparing for the task and assessing the risk. Work as a team. Resolve issues if you can. Do it outside of the workplace. Resolve them, but what you want to focus on is the actual task at hand. Do an internal audit on your health and safety system. Don't wait for the Department of Labor or external or even your clients to come and audit you. Go over your own systems and see where you are sitting. And then if you need to adjust it. But get the employees involved in those adjustments because they will then be able to see what is being done. They will see tangible elements of the actual health and safety system at work, and they will better understand the safety files that they are signing. So that's all for us this morning. Again, our safety. Now, as we mentioned, the rest of May, we are going to be focusing on ladders, scaffolding, and ceilings, working at heights areas that we want to reduce these falls, if possible, even to the point of 100% hookup at heights. And that is really our target. So thanks again. And we're going to hand it over back to you, Karim.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this informative session. We do have a comment from Mr. Hamilton. I agree that withdrawing the COC from 10254 will leave the consumer excluded from education, experience to safety, and vulnerable to material and workmanship failure. In addition, this may result in insurance companies not honoring claims and leaving the customer having to pay for damages as there are no terms and conditions being signed for.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Hamilton. We really appreciate that thought. In fact, that is one of the things that even IOPSA and PRB are striving for, because this is something that really is going to lend to the quality of the work being performed. And so I would 100% agree with you on that. And even, in fact, if you can send us more info, we'd really appreciate your feedback on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, it seems like we've answered all our questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and end the session now.